I did not say that. I filed it instead. The way I filed everything my board's 412 certified Deathworlds had taught me never to say aloud without evidence attached. I was standing in the ossuary vault beneath the Krivenesh capital, running final verification on the certification of Dreth IX, our 411th confirmed Deathworld, a planet where the atmosphere itself dissolved unshielded flesh in under 90 seconds, when the summons for a new candidate world arrived. I was Krivenesh of the Obsidian Reach, and I chaired the Deathworld Certification Board, a position earned through 181 years of service and the loss of both my original mandibles to a Dreth survey accident I wore, unreplaced, as a visible credential rather than a wound. Deathworlder certification was not a compliment on my world. It was a warning label, and I was the one who wrote them. My species had survived 7 Deathworlds ourselves across our expansion history, and we understood, better than any civilization in the charted reach, exactly what surviving one cost a species, the specific hollowing out, the particular hardness that settled into a people who had to fight their own planet just to exist on it. I could look at a species' architecture, their burial customs, the calluses on their hands, and tell you within a narrow margin what kind of world had made them. That was my function. I judged Deathworlders, because I had been made from one myself. Board Secretary Vren found me in the vault. New candidate, designation, human. Homeworld flagged by 3 independent survey teams for classification review. Priority, contested. 2 teams rate it non-Deathworld, moderate hazard only. 1 team rates it Deathworld adjacent, citing behavioral anomalies rather than environmental hazard. I had never, in 181 years, seen a certification request driven by behavior rather than environment. Deathworlder status was a measure of what a planet did to its inhabitants. Gravity, toxicity, predation density, seismic instability. It was not a measure of what the inhabitants did to each other or to themselves. I logged the anomaly and authorized direct observation. I brought 2 juniors. Thask, an environmental hazard specialist who measured every world in decimal percentages and trusted nothing else, and Aura, my apprentice, 40 years into a certification track I had personally sponsored, still young enough to ask questions before she had learned which ones a board chair was supposed to already have answered. The human world's provisional file described a planet of moderate gravity, breathable atmosphere, no unusual predation pressure beyond what any temperate biosphere carried. By every environmental metric my board used, it should have certified as harmless within an hour of arrival. I did not expect the assignment to require more than a standard survey cycle. We settled our platform in cloaked orbit above a temperate coastal region, and I began the environmental baseline that should have concluded the entire matter. The baseline concluded nothing. The behavior did not. The first anomalous data point arrived on the 2nd day, and like all such entries, it presented itself as something almost too small to be worth cataloging at all. Local observation recorded a human male, designation later confirmed as Marcus Webb, employed as a lineman for the Regional Power Authority, engaged in emergency repair work atop a support structure during active severe weather. Wines our own atmospheric models classified as lethal to unprotected structures above 40 meters. His safety harness had partially failed during the ascent. Our sensors registered a fall arrest that stopped him 11 meters short of the ground, held by a single anchor point rated for less than half the stress it was absorbing. He did not descend. He completed the repair, restoring power to a residential grid section before allowing his colleagues to lower him. Thask ran the stress tolerances twice. The anchor point should have failed. Statistically, it should have failed. It did not. I am aware it did not. I am saying the behavior of continuing the repair after a near-fatal equipment failure, rather than descending immediately, is not consistent with any risk management framework in our survey data. I filed the entry as behavioral anomaly unresolved and continued cataloging, though something in my processing had already begun reorganizing itself around a question I did not yet have the vocabulary to ask. The catalog grew, and it grew in a direction none of my 411 prior certifications had prepared me for. I observed a child, designation confirmed as Mia Okafor, 9 years of age by growth rate approximation, consume what our sensors flagged as a demonstrably unpalatable and mildly gastrointestinally hazardous local confection during a social gathering with peers, a dare our translation matrix rendered it, undertaken for entertainment and social standing among her age cohort. She did this laughing, describing the sensation to her peers in terms our matrix struggled to render coherently, something involving the word gross, delivered with evident pride rather than distress. That is self-directed harm undertaken for social currency, Thask said, disturbed in a register I had not previously heard from him. On a death world, that behavior pattern indicates desensitization to risk from prolonged environmental threat exposure. But this world has no environmental threat justifying it. I did not have an answer. I filed the question instead, the way I had begun filing everything I could not yet resolve. Days later, the same child, I had begun tracking her specifically. An irregularity in my methodology I did not examine too closely was observed at what local records identified as her educational institution, dividing a food ration with a peer who possessed none. No adult instructed this. No survival calculus justified it. She had, per our nutritional scans, marginally insufficient caloric intake for her own growth requirements that cycle. She gave away roughly half regardless, folded the remainder back into her satchel, and returned to a conversation about an entertainment program, as though the exchange carried no weight worth remarking on. Aura, beside me, said the thing that would not leave my processing for the remainder of the assignment. She's starving a little, and she still gave half away. That's not a Deathworld behavior. Deathworlds make people hoard. I am aware. Then why does she look like she comes from one? I did not answer, because I had begun, against every certification standard I had personally authored, to suspect Aura had identified something true that my board's entire framework had no mechanism for measuring. I observed a man, designation Cole Whitfield, pilot a modified ground vehicle directly into the path of a rotating atmospheric disturbance our own models rated lethal beyond 91% probability, narrating his own escalating fear aloud into a recording device rather than suppressing it, a behavior I had only previously catalogued among elite Krivnesh war scouts trained across decades to externalize fear as a survival tool. Whitfield had received no comparable training. He did it instinctively, the way Mia Okafor gave away food instinctively, the way Marcus Webb finished the repair instinctively, and I began to understand that I was not cataloging isolated anomalies. I was cataloging a pattern I had no certification tier for, a species behaving consistently as though every soft ordinary day was itself the death world, requiring the same hardened responses my board reserved for the 7 most lethal environments in the charted reach, except applied here to nothing environmental at all, applied instead to each other, to hunger, to fear, to strangers. This is not Deathworlder behavior, Thask insisted, running his final challenge before the crisis made the question academic. This is overfitting. You are seeing a pattern because you were trained to see one. Compare the actual hazard data. This planet does not qualify. The hazard data has never been the anomaly, Thask. The behavior is the anomaly. I am not asking whether their planet nearly killed them. I am asking why they act, daily, as though it still might, and give pieces of themselves away regardless. He had no answer, and I filed his silence the way I had learned to file everything that cost too much to resolve immediately. The crisis arrived through our own failure, the way it always does. Our platform's structural containment, weakened by an extended low-orbit survey cycle none of my prior certifications had required, fractured during a routine repositioning above the coastal region on the 11th day. Thask caught the fault 4 seconds before critical failure, not enough time for controlled displacement. We came down hard, cloak failing entirely on impact, in full daylight, on a residential street less than 200 meters from the school where I had spent the preceding week watching Mia Okafor divide her lunch. Board protocol was explicit. A cloaked platform failing catastrophically over an uncontacted world executes silent emergency extraction regardless of crew injury, accepting total equipment and personnel loss if necessary, rather than risk any direct contact that could compromise eventual formal certification protocol. I gave the order. It failed immediately. The same fracture that grounded us had corrupted our extraction beacon beyond field repair, and Thask's lower carapace had been crushed against a support strut in the impact, pinning him in a position from which Aura and I alone lacked the leverage to free him before his organ function began to fail. I do not fully understand, even now, what made me transmit an open distress signal in direct violation of every certification protocol I had personally enforced against candidate species for a century and a half, rather than attempt silent extraction and accept whatever became of Thask in the process. I told the review board afterward that Thask's condition made silent extraction medically indefensible, and that was true. It was not the whole truth. The whole truth was that I had spent 11 days cataloging a species that gave pieces of itself away with no calculation attached, and some part of my certification framework had concluded, without my formal authorization, that if my crew was going to be found broken on an alien street, it should happen near children who apparently could not walk past hunger without doing something about it. Mia Okafor was not the first to reach the wreckage. Her mother reached it first, drawn by the impact sound, but Mia arrived within the minute, small and unafraid in a way that made no sense against everything my board had certified about how sentient beings respond to catastrophic unknowns. She did not run. She looked at 3 broken, unidentified alien bodies in a smoking wreck on her own street, and the first thing our audio recorded her saying, translated, was not a question about what we were. It was, "Mom, that one's still moving. We have to help it." Directed at Thask, pinned and struggling. Her mother pulled her back, understandably, and it was an adult neighbor, Daniel Reyes, we would later confirm, a volunteer emergency responder whose own catalog of impossible behavior I had reviewed in an entirely separate assignment file months prior, arriving from 2 streets over, who reached the wreckage first among the adults, assessing the crushed strut pinning Thask with the same immediate practical focus I had documented in him before. But it was Mia who would not be moved back a second time, who slipped past her mother's grip while the adults worked the strut free, and knelt at the cracked edge of the hull beside where I lay pinned, my own carapace fractured along the ridge housing my primary nerve cluster. She did not know what I was. She did not wait to find out before deciding what to do about it. She had, in her satchel, the same ration she had divided with a hungry classmate 11 days earlier, a smaller portion now, her lunch for that day, already halved once by habit. She held it out toward the gap in my cracked exterior plating. Translated words uncertain and small. "I don't know if you eat, but you should have some. You look hungry too. I do not eat as humans do." The gesture required no nutritional logic to register as what it was. She had nothing spare. I had confirmed, across 11 days of surveillance, that her caloric intake ran marginally short of her own growth requirements, and she offered half of what remained to a broken, unidentifiable creature from beyond her own world, for no reason her species' survival calculus could justify, because the alternative, watching something hungry and hurt and doing nothing, had apparently never occurred to her as an option at all. It was in that moment, held together by a species I had built my entire career certifying as either safe or lethal, and had never once considered might be both, that I understood my missing mandibles had never meant what 181 years of board doctrine told me they meant. I had believed they meant, I have survived what a deathworld does to a body, and I know its cost. Held against Mia Okafor's small hand, offering half a ration to something that terrified every threat assessment framework I had ever authored, I understood they meant something far smaller. I had learned to measure what a planet takes from a species. I had never once measured what a species chooses to give away regardless of what it has left. I did not say this to her. I filed it, because filing was the only vocabulary my training had given me for something this large. And even as Daniel Reyes and her mother pulled her gently back from the wreckage, still holding the ration out toward me, as though I might change my mind, I catalogued the sensation the only way I knew how. Structural realignment, category unresolved, severity, total. The review came 10 days later, aboard the recovery vessel, under a tribunal I had chaired for a century and a half and now stood before instead. Board Elder Karsk presided. "You transmitted an open distress beacon in populated uncontacted territory. You allowed direct physical contact with local sentients, including a juvenile, in violation of certification protocol you personally authored. Do you dispute the record?" "I do not dispute the record." "Then explain why this board should not revoke your chairmanship on this transcript alone." I did not read from prepared documentation. I had built my career on decimal percentage environmental metrics, and I found, standing before the board, that those metrics contained no argument sufficient for what I needed to say, so I built the case from the catalog instead. Elder Karsk, I have certified 411 Deathworlds. I know precisely what a lethal planet costs a species: the hoarding, the hardness, the narrowed instinct towards self-preservation above all else. I have 11 days of continuous observation of a species, with no comparable environmental hazard, exhibiting every behavioral marker of a species that has survived one. A child who divides insufficient food with strangers. A man who finishes dangerous work rather than abandon it half done. A worker who narrates his fear aloud specifically so it will not consume him. And a 9-year-old, minutes after watching my crew crash on her street, offering half her own inadequate ration to a creature she had never seen before and had every reason to fear. I do not have a certification tier for a species that behaves like Deathworlder survivors without a Deathworld to explain it. I am not asking the board to feel anything about that. I am asking the board to explain, on the evidence, how such a species is anything other than exceptional. You are proposing we certify based on generosity, Karsk said, though I noted his voice had lost its opening edge. Not hazard. I am proposing the board's entire hazard-only framework may be incomplete, Elder. I have the footage. I do not have the certainty to tell you what it means. I am certain only that 411 prior certifications did not prepare me to file it away as ordinary. The chamber held silent long enough that I believed I had achieved nothing. Your chairmanship is suspended pending formal review, Karsk said finally. Not revoked. The classification is logged, provisionally, as contested. Behavioral anomaly, environmental non-death world. This board has never used that designation before. It will require extended study before any board chair, present or future, closes this file. It was not vindication. It was a door left open rather than sealed, and I understood, filing the ruling, that it was more than I had any standing right to expect. I wrote my formal assessment across the following days in the technical language the board required: exposure percentages, behavioral frequency data, cross-referenced timestamps. Buried in the final appendix, where sentiment does not survive scrutiny because no one reads appendices for sentiment, I wrote, subject Mia Okafor demonstrates repeated, unprompted resource-sharing behavior toward both conspecifics and unidentified non-conspecifics at caloric cost to herself at a frequency inconsistent with every survival model in board records for non-death world species. I cannot certify this world as harmless. I cannot certify it as hazardous. I can certify only that a species which gives away what it does not have to spare to something it has every reason to fear cannot be closed under any classification this board currently maintains. The report moved up the chain to elders who had never had a child's hand hold food out toward their cracked exterior plating, who would read percentages and decide, eventually, what this world would become in board registry. I returned to limited duty once the inquiry closed, without formal sanction, uncertain. Still, whether I had earned that mercy or simply been extended one, I did not yet understand how to repay. I keep an unofficial file now. One no board has requested. Passive surveillance confirms Mia Okafor is unchanged. She has continued in the months since, dividing what little she has with those who have less, unaware that somewhere in orbit above her ordinary Tuesdays, a species that survived 7 death worlds is still trying to understand what she gave away and why it cost her nothing she was unwilling to lose. I do not look at the gap where my mandibles used to be the way I once did. For 181 years it meant I have survived what a world can take from a body. I understand now it meant something smaller. I had learned to measure loss. I had never once measured what a species gives away on purpose, with nothing forcing the choice at all. I do not know if I will encounter Mia Okafor again. My board has not authorized further contact, and I have not requested it, though the request remains drafted, unsent, in the same file as everything else about this world I have not yet closed. If it comes to that, if some future crisis brings me into range of a species my own certification still cannot fully classify, I have already decided what I will do. I am simply waiting for the moment someone asks it of me.